space is a place for us.
Real people with real issues.
Discussing real topics.
Black Space.
A safe space for our community.
When a parent drops their kid off at school, I akin that to people coming to church on Sunday. If the church has 1,000 members, probably less than 100 of them are actually involved. And when I say involved, involvement in the church is involvement outside of those four walls. Most church members aren't. Most church members are comfortable paying their tithes and leaving. And believe it or not, there have been many polls taken of the amount of people that actually pay tithes. It's a very small percentage. I know that the church takes in a lot of money. I know a lot of people focus a lot on the money they take in, but most members of the church aren't even involved doing anything outside of the church. And so that's why I'm cautious when I have that conversation. When you, as a teacher, certainly you know that there are very few parents that are involved. Percentage-wise, that's about the same in the church. And so that's one of the reasons. That's why I made the comment earlier that the church is a microcosm of the African-American community as a whole. And when people talk about accountability, again, we don't hold, I agree, we do hold schools accountable in terms of we'll take our kids out of a bad school, but churches aren't much different. People will stay at a church, but leave when they when churches try to hold them accountable for certain things. So that's a conversation I do want to kind of dig into. George.
Yes, sir.
The conversation is people always talk about the money that churches take in and how there's little giving back. Do you think there's a difference between the Black church and any other entity in the Black community? Because I believe that a lot of entities take money from the Black community and don't give anything back.
When I heard that comment, I think it's a very accurate comment and relevant comment. It reminded me of a comment by Dr. Umar Johnson, who notes that the Black community makes the church its center of operations. The white community, however, makes banks their center of operations. And so they get a lot more, if you want to be of service to anybody, and churches are a service institution, you can't service without a strong economic platform. So I would submit that banks can be your most spiritual resource that you can use. So they get a lot more in the work of doing your ministry. And so what happens is in the white community, they have as many churches as well. However, because they make banks the center of their community, they can go to their banks for every developmental phase of life needs that they have. Where the Black community, we put all our money and resources into our churches. And on Sundays, the churches are like holding just enormous amounts of money that they then turn around and deposit into banking institutions that do not represent us. So we're not being spiritually sound with our use of the money. We're not being supportive of our community with our use of the money. And we're not being stewards of our resources by taking money out of our community and putting it into a system that is statistically known for discriminating against us or charging us higher rates for the same level of service, if not just denying us altogether. So that's where we're making a strategic error. We're playing this moralistic game against the community that's playing an economic game. And no matter how you look at it, as spiritual as you want to be, and I said this on a previous podcast, you can only be as spiritual as you can afford to be.
And I promise you guys, this was not planned by me.
Who is that lovely lady?
This is amazing Ivo. She's the other host on here on Black Space. She's also an ordained minister. And I say that I kind of preference the conversation by letting them know I'm kind of biased today. I kind of came wearing my bias. kind of came where my bias. And so I know that all of a sudden this ordained minister kind of jumps on into the conversation as I call them backups. I will make a quick joke. It was divine intervention, y'all. It was divine. I didn't plan it. God planned that. But Ivo, we're having a conversation, and I don't know where you picked up on the conversation, but some comments were made about, obviously, actually, Brother Karate said the Black church is on its way to extinction. So did Brother Daniel.
That was me. That was,
Brother Daniel said the Black church is on its way to extinction. I think Brother Karate, you agree with that notion. Ivo, we were talking about the pros and cons of the Black church, the current Black church. As an ordained minister, and I made the points that that the Black church is a microcosm of the Black community as a whole, and I think that a lot of folks overestimate what goes on in Black churches, and they underestimate what takes place. And so, as an ordained minister, you can certainly give us more insight on that.
I agree wholeheartedly with your point, Penny. It is definitely a microcosm of the Black community. And I find it interesting that a panel of Black men discussing Black church are talking about accountability without talking about the absence of Black men, because the lack of accountability that does exist exists because y'all not there. We are holding it down by ourselves almost as women, and there's only so much we can do. It's extremely difficult to police the behavior of men. As an ordained minister and an elder in the church, it was interesting maneuvering through some of the authoritative issues, because some men don't have a problem with women in leadership, and many men do because of underdeveloped egos and what have you. So I could not effectively do my job at the last church that I attended because of issues with female leadership. So when we do try to hold people accountable, we often go unheard. Women are often the victims of the things that people need to be held accountable for, but there's no men to help. There are very few, and the ones who are there aren't always alpha males or strong types who are willing to challenge authority when something is amok or something goes awry. So how do you feel, those of you who believe that the Black church needs to be extinct, how do you feel about Black men returning to possibly salvage the situation, just like in every other aspect of the Black community?
Daniel, you made the extension comment. Go ahead, respond.
All right. I wholeheartedly disagree, and here's why. And I'll give my context. I grew up in the Black church. My father is an ordained pastor in the Black church. I've been overseas as a missionary with the Black church. I went to a Black UNCF HBCU for college, right? So my experience isn't one from somebody who's been on the outside this whole time throwing stones. What it has come from is, when I look at Black Christianity, too often, and I'm going to speak to the point about the men, the presence of the men, but too often we've always approached it from the standpoint of being Christians first. And we don't have that luxury of being Christians first when we're treated as Black first by society. And I see that, but what I'm not talking about qualitative, I'm talking about quantitative. When we look at the numbers, what do the numbers say about where we stand in society? And so here's what we tend to do. We tend to say that the Black church has been the reason that we've had all this progress. And what we do is we measure our progress based on where we were previously, but we never measure our progress against white Christians, right? So I always have a problem because I measure the gap. I don't measure how far we've come. I measure the gap from dominant society. But that's a theology issue.
That's a 400-year gap. Like, we started out, we're here in America starting with negative wealth, negative everything. So in closing the gap, like, how?
But we've been Christians the whole time, right? So when you speak about a 400-year gap, but we were Christians in 1620 when we first came over here.
But you seem to be conflating issues here. Like, the gap that you're talking about I hear what I'm hearing, and I could have it wrong, so I want to clarify and make sure that I'm getting you right. What I'm hearing when you're talking about measuring the gap, it sounds like you're measuring things that are more societal than spiritual or religious, like white churches' ability to do missions and other things because they have wealth to do it, which has nothing to do with their Christianity. That's a societal issue. With Black people starting with negative wealth in our society, we're not going to be able to fund the same things as white churches. So if you're measuring the gap in that context, then I don't see how that's a fair measurement. If you want to measure it in terms of spirituality and Christ-likeness, then we're certainly doing way better than white church. Like,
May I interject between you two real quick?
I just want to clarify my point. I don't want to make this about Christian beliefs in spirituality versus Christian beliefs in spirituality. The discussion is, has the Black church benefited the Black community? So I'm looking at it quantifiably, not qualifiably.
Quantifying with what criteria? Is this just economic or is it spiritual?
So I'd like to interject. With that.
Go ahead, George.
You both for a minute. Okay. Ivo and Daniel, you're both right. You're both right. It may sound like you're arguing on two different sides of the coin, but both of your perspectives are correct. What needs to be addressed, though, is the why behind what you're observing. There's a reason why you have such a dearth of strong Black male figures in the system of the Black church as it stands today. And we don't address that. And Daniel starts to hit on that with his very powerful observation of, it's hard to be spiritual when you're treated as Black first. And that's a very powerful statement, because as men, first of all, Ivo, when you said a panel of Black men, I know I'm going to sound weird or crazy compared to everybody, but I no longer identify by a color, because that color has a set of beliefs associated that are responsible for the statement that Daniel made, when you're treated as Black first. And I find that anything that we try to organize and we put a color to it, it ends up being lower. It never quite hits the visionary mark we think we're doing. Consciously, we put that name there because we want to uplift ourselves. We want to show that we are somebody. We want to prove to the opposite side of the color coin that we are just as good. But oftentimes, the outcomes make liars out of us. So I'm submitting to you all in this conversation that the first layer of obstacles that's holding or smothering our effectiveness spiritually is this term of racial label Black, because we have internalized on a subconscious basis what Black is, and we often sabotage ourselves without even realizing. And when we talk about trying to be a man and put Black in front of it, what we're doing is we are taking a role, a hierarchical role in the race construct that is lower than any other man.
Black Space, a safe space for our community.